Hi, the theme of this presentation is Outlawism, Boundary Blending, and Media. So I'm going to kind of relate these three things in a few slides here. So a quick reminder of the folks we've friended thus far in DMA. This is a group that's characterized by the blending of boundaries, right? So again, that's part of the theme here. People like Fuller, Chomsky, Goblik, Assange, all the rest, really, a bunch of outlaws in some respects. So that's what we're focusing on. Why is that? So why? It's because generally outlawism is characterized by the blending or violation of boundaries, at least in the cultural sense. Outlawism sort of means as someone who's kind of violating the rules or the boundaries or the borders between different things. So oftentimes these folks are regarded as outlaws. They're folks that know no bounds. So that's the beginning connection with outlawism and boundaries. So one of the boundaries here is that artists are supposed to stay in the artist box, right? So even though you're asking creative people to kind of stay put, so there's a kind of freaky contradiction here, and many artists, of course, refuse to stay even in the artist box. Scientists as well, they're supposed to stay in the science box, and it seems like, though, if you look around, the good ones often refuse to do this. Think about Einstein, who, for example, among other things, played the violin and asserted that creativity was much more important than intellect in terms of scientific breakthroughs and just generally doing scientific work. Or think about the gentleman we've already friended, Buckminster Fuller. Obviously someone who didn't spend all of his days and nights in a science lab, right? Got out and got outside the science box in a way and looked around. So, not to go totally extremo here, though, there are also good things to say about the artist box, about the science box and all that. So it might make sense to think of this as just making excursions or trips outside the box and then returning. It certainly doesn't, the idea that you break boundaries or blend boundaries or categories doesn't mean that you just cease to respect them at all either. So anyway, we met in the ecological design movie, we met quite a group of folks who were referred to as the design outlaws. So that's kind of where we started our friending of such folk. I want to add a few people to this collection. Robert Rauschenberg, one of the most important 20th century artists, who just died, I think, within the last couple years or so. This is a famous quote from him. Painting relates to both art and life. Neither can be made. I try to act in the gap between the two. So here he is kind of, again, refusing the boundary. And here, breaking down a very important boundary for some of the folks we've been looking at and will look at in the next little while. Breaking down the boundary between art and life. So kind of, again, still functioning as an artist, but beginning to branch out and pull things into the mix. So this is a piece by Rauschenberg. His early work was pretty well known. He did things that were called combines, appropriately enough, where we might call them assemblages, where he basically combined two-dimensional and three-dimensional objects into some pretty grand artwork. This would be one of his pieces too. Another thing he did, this is actually him there on the left, he worked with Merce Cunningham. He basically didn't stay in the box of being a visual artist either. He did performances, theater, etc. So this is another example of sort of outlawism, boundary blending, right? Christo, who's an artist, Christo and Jean-Claude, or as they're known now, they pretty much function as a team. Old folks here acting not like old folks, so they're breaking that boundary as well, right? Very interesting folks. Extremely good artists. Christo on the left, I got to hear him speak one time and he told this very interesting story about, he does work like this, let me move ahead to the next slide here, where he does large-scale environmental work. So this is a project that he did, wrapping this kind of gorgeous sort of pink fabric around a collection of islands, I think in the Florida Keys, certainly somewhere in Florida. Anyway, these large-scale projects, environmental artworks, right, designed to sort of be out in the world, not in the studio, not in the museum, etc. And he told this story of when he was an art student in Bulgaria. It was when Bulgaria was a pretty much a totalitarian communist country, and the art students were under pretty strict orders to sort of do what they were told. And so one of the things that they were asked to do, he was asked with a group of other students to go out on a sort of fact-finding trip. They got on the only train that went through Bulgaria that Westerners would be on, such that they would actually see what life was like inside Bulgaria. The art students were asked to go out and sort of give some advice about how to make the landscape along this train route look really nice, right? Really aesthetically pleasing, so that people would think, oh, Bulgaria is really doing great. And Christo was one of those students. And so, again, the boundary between art and life, this kind of life experience in his part, really impacted his artwork later, where he seems to have made that made an impact on him. That idea that you'd go and talk to farmers about how to arrange their haystacks and where to put this or that so that things would look really nice, got him immediately thinking about art on a pretty grand environmental scale. The great psychologist Carl Gustav Jung belongs in this sort of list of outlaws as well. He sort of violated the boundary between male and female, in a sense, by his theory of psychoanalysis was related to sort of the unconscious of every male has a female character, the unconscious of every female has a male character. So he called these the anima and the animus. And you may learn more about Jung in a couple of your other classes. But he's an interesting guy in this respect, also, for sort of violating one of the either-ors that we tend to think are just completely separate, male, female. And I would actually propose that, in fact, art and science are both belong here as kind of outlaw activities, because they blend physical and mental. So again, there's this kind of, in our culture, we tend to have this either-or between the physical and the mental, or the material and the immaterial. And both art and science sort of function in the middle. They're both areas where the physical and the mental are pretty much intertwined or combined. Moving on a bit here, anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss spoke of betwixt and between, things that are in the middle as being liminal. And he sort of mentioned that these have a curious place in human societies. And like media, like art, like science, these things, liminal things, can cause problems in either-or frameworks, which again I propose, at least we're thinking about that's the type of framework that our culture generally has. And so liminal things cause us a little bit of trouble. And there's a media story here, right? So we remember media, it's in the middle, and that's kind of what the word means. Media means in the middle. And so keeping in mind this notion that liminal things create problems for either-or frameworks, this means media means a typical particular kind of trouble. And to the rescue, Marshall McLuhan, the grandfather of media studies, right? Really interesting guy. We're going to get to meet him on several occasions in the course. He regarded electric or electronic, he tended to call it electric media, as an externalized nervous system. So he felt like the logic of nervous systems is to connect everything. So in a way, it's like turning the lights on 24 hours a day. Media kind of remains perpetually in the middle. So in a way, the sort of status or nature of media is sort of perpetually troubling in a way. And according to McLuhan's logic, the world, with the advent of electronic or electric media, suddenly gets flooded or saturated with liminality, or with this sort of logic of in-betweenness. And this represents a big change. So it means, for example, on a really prosaic or practical level, the electric light meant that the boundary between night and day tended to blend. We're seeing a lot of instances right now where the boundary between public and private is blending in the digital era. So you know, many stories are like this now, that are featuring this kind of breakdown of this particular boundary. Again, the boundary between art and science is breaking down, between education and life. Pretty much you name it. If you look around, I think it's possible at least to think that one of the things that's really the big change in our society right now, and it's partly a media story, is this sort of blending of boundaries. So what was formerly a kind of maybe avant-garde perspective, you know, the folks early on that would have sort of cut against the grain, against the either or, would have jumped outside the box, would have been the creative souls that would have sort of challenged the status quo, is becoming much more common, right? Because the idea is with this logic of in-between or liminality being dispersed via electronic media, we have this idea that boundary crashing or boundary blending is sort of in the water supply, and we're all kind of swimming in this kind of outliism, swimming in electrified water, if you will. So I put this image in here of a kind of, you know, this sort of commonality now of this idea that may have been this sort of really avant-garde, cool idea. You know, Susie Goblik, Assange, Chomsky, all these people. Now pretty much everyone is being sort of bathed in the same logic that they're operating in. So the point of this presentation is just to you know, introduce a few people that kind of fit into the outlaw boundary blender category, and also just to put it out there for you to consider that boundaries are an important issue to think about in media studies. So it's worth your attention and worth a little bit of thought on this one.